Today, we'll explore the 4 essential architectural elements that define authentic Japanese gardens. Tea houses. They are the ultimate expression of refined simplicity. Bridges, which are physical and symbolic passages through the garden. Gates, thresholds that transform your state of mind. And finally, pavilions, vantage points that frame nature's beauty. Let's begin our journey through the built elements that have defined Japanese gardens for centuries. First up will be tea houses, the philosophy of refined simplicity. Of all architectural elements in Japanese gardens, none embodies Japanese aesthetic principles more perfectly than the tea house, chashitsu, chashitsu. What appears at first glance to be a humble hut reveals itself, upon closer inspection, to be an architectural masterpiece of refined simplicity. The tea house tradition emerged during the Muromachi period, 1336 to 1573, reaching its definitive form under the influence of the legendary tea master Sen-no Rikyu in the 16th century. What makes this tradition revolutionary is how it transformed limitations into virtues, elevating simplicity to an art form during a time when ostentation was the norm among the aristocracy. The earliest dedicated tea rooms were formal spaces within aristocratic residences. As the practice evolved under Zen influence, tea masters deliberately moved away from luxury toward the aesthetic of wabi, chabi, finding beauty in imperfection and austerity. Sen-no Rikyu crystallized this approach by creating the son, chao-an, or thatched hut style, a small humble structure that referenced the dwellings of mountain hermits. His famous tea house at Tayan, with a mere 2 tatami mats of floor space, about 3.3 square meters, remains the ultimate expression of refined minimalism. At Katsura Imperial Villa in Kyoto, we find the Shokintei tea house perfectly illustrating how this aesthetic transferred to imperial settings without losing its essential character of restraint and harmony with nature. Now, the typical tea house incorporates several distinctive features. Number 1. Nijiriguchi, Linko, the low crawl-through entrance, typically measuring just 65 centimeters square. This deliberate design forces guests to bow upon entering, regardless of social status, physically embodying humility as they enter the tea space. At Daitokuji's Koto-in Temple, the entrance is said to have been designed so that samurai warriors would need to remove their swords before entering, creating a peaceful equality inside. Number 2. The interior space, which typically features tatami floors, a tokonoma, alcove, for displaying a hanging scroll or seasonal arrangement, and minimal furnishings. The standard size, from the tiny 2-mat koma to the more common 4.5-mat yojohan, maintains human scale and intimacy. Number 3. Use natural materials, unfinished or minimally finished, wood, bamboo, clay walls, and other natural materials showing their inherent character. At the Tayan Tea House, preserved at Myokian Temple, wooden structural elements deliberately reveal tool marks and natural imperfections. And number 4, the relationship with its surroundings. Carefully positioned windows frame specific garden views, while the entire structure is designed to blend with its environment rather than dominate it. At the Katsura Imperial Villa, windows in the Shokintei Tea House are positioned at different heights to capture different perspectives when seated or standing. Let's talk about the tea garden, or also known as roji. The tea house cannot be properly understood without considering the garden path, roji, that leads to it. This transitional passage is designed to separate visitors from the everyday world, preparing them mentally and spiritually for the tea ceremony experience. Now, the elements of the typical roji include 1. A waiting bench, koshikake machiai, where guests contemplate before being summoned. 2. The stone water basin, tsukubai, for ritual purification of hands and mouth. 3. The carefully placed stepping stones to control pacing and focus attention downward. And 4. Subdued plantings, emphasizing texture over color or showiness. At Koto-in Temple in Kyoto, the approach to the tea house passes through a bamboo grove. Then a moss garden, creating a graduated journey from the outside world to the refined tea space, physically embodying the psychological transition the guest undergoes. The principles embodied in traditional tea house architecture, human scale, natural materials, connection with surroundings, and meaningful simplicity, have influenced modern architecture worldwide. From contemporary Japanese minimalism to Western tiny house movements, the tea house remains relevant as an antidote to excess and disconnection from nature. For today's garden designers, even a small tea house-inspired shelter can transform a garden from merely decorative to experiential, creating a destination that encourages mindful presence and appreciation of surroundings. We will move on to bridges in Japanese gardens, also known as the passages of transformation. Bridges in Japanese gardens are never merely functional crossings, but symbolic thresholds, physical expressions of transition and transformation. Unlike Western tradition, where bridges often serve as architectural showpieces, Japanese garden bridges embody philosophical concepts through their form, materials, and placement. The Japanese word for bridge, hashi, chao, shares pronunciation with edge or margin, suggesting its role as a mediator between different states or conditions. This dual meaning reflects how garden bridges connect not just physical spaces, but conceptual raisons, earth to heaven, ignorance to enlightenment, everyday consciousness to heightened awareness. Bridge design in Japanese gardens evolved through distinct historical phases. During the Heian period, 794 to 1185, aristocratic gardens featured elegant arched bridges inspired by Chinese models, often painted vermilion. At Byodo-in Temple's Phoenix Hall, completed in 1053, the wooden bridge connecting to the central building symbolizes the passage from this world to the Western paradise of Amida Buddha. The Kamakura and Muromachi periods, 1185 to 1573, saw greater diversity in bridge forms as gardens became settings for contemplation rather than merely aristocratic pleasure. Zen influence brought more naturalistic designs using unfinished materials and asymmetrical forms. The Edo period, 1603 to 1868, featured elaborate stroll gardens with multiple bridges creating narrative journeys. At Koishikawa Korakuen in Tokyo, completed in the 1620s, different bridge styles mark transitions between landscape scenes inspired by famous Japanese and Chinese locations. Japanese garden bridges take several distinctive forms, each with specific symbolic meanings, such as arched bridges, fanrichiao, soribashi. These elegant curved bridges create perfect circles when reflected in water below, symbolizing completeness and the unity of heaven and earth. At Ritsurin Garden in Takamatsu, the Engetsu-kyo, full moon bridge, embodies this principle perfectly, with its wooden arch forming a complete circle with its reflection. The height of the arch also serves practical purposes, allowing boats to pass underneath in larger gardens, while creating dramatic vantage points for viewing the garden from elevated positions. Next, we move on to flat bridges. Pingqiao, hirabashi. Simple horizontal bridges made of stone slabs or wooden planks represent stability and directness. These understated crossings often appear in tea gardens, where their straightforward design aligns with tea ceremony principles of simplicity and directness. At Katsura Imperial Villa, flat wooden bridges create unpretentious connections between garden areas. their weathered grey wood blending harmoniously with surrounding stones and plants. Now we move on to stone bridges, shichao, ishibashi. Constructed from multiple stone slabs, these durable bridges represent permanence and strength. Often appearing partially submerged, they create a dynamic relationship with water, seemingly floating just at the surface. At Isui-en Garden in Nara, flat stepping stone bridges emerge just above the water's surface, requiring mindful attention to cross, physically enforcing the garden principle of heightened awareness. Our fourth type of bridge style are the zigzag bridges, zurechao, or abashi. These bridges with multiple turns serve both practical and philosophical purposes. Practically, the turns create stability without requiring central supports. Philosophically, they force slowness and change of perspective, while also deterring evil spirits believed to travel only in straight lines. At the Portland Japanese Garden in Oregon, the zigzag bridge across the lower pond exemplifies how this traditional form encourages contemplative pacing through its very structure. And last but not least, we have the earth bridges, tuchao, dobashi, simple land bridges across narrow water features, represent groundedness and connection to earth. Often planted with moss or grass, they blur the line between natural and constructed elements. At Kenroku-en Garden in Kanazawa, earth bridges create subtle transitions between garden areas, their planted surfaces merging visually with surrounding landscape. The positioning of bridges in Japanese gardens is never arbitrary, but carefully considered for both practical and aesthetic reasons. Bridges create focal points and frame views both of and from the crossing. Their reflections in water double their visual impact and symbolic presence. They control movement through the garden, dictating pace and viewpoints. They often mark transitions between different garden themes or areas. At Koraku-en Garden in Okayama, a sequence of different bridge styles creates a narrative journey through landscapes representing different philosophical concepts, from the material world to more spiritual realms. Even in small contemporary gardens, bridge elements can create significant impact. A simple stone slab across a narrow water feature creates both visual interest and functionality, or a wooden footbridge over a dry streambed can suggest water even when none is present. Artistic interpretations of traditional forms can connect modern spaces to historical tradition. The essential principle remains consistent. Bridges should serve as meaningful transitions rather than merely decorative elements. We will move on now to our third architectural element, which are thresholds between worlds, also known as gates in Japanese gardens. Gates and entrances in Japanese gardens are powerful threshold spaces, physically marking transitions between different realms, while psychologically preparing visitors for changed experiences. Unlike Western garden design, where gates often serve primarily as decorative or security features, Japanese gates function as experiential devices that transform consciousness. The Japanese term monmen encompasses everything from elaborate structural gateways to the simplest suggestion of an entrance, all sharing the common purpose of defining boundaries between different states of being. Gate design in Japanese gardens reflects broader architectural traditions while adapting them to garden settings. Early Heian period, 794 to 1185, garden gates drew from Chinese and Buddhist temple architecture, with formal structures marking entrances to aristocratic estates and temple grounds. At Byodo-in Temple, the elaborate structural gate prepares visitors for the sacred precinct within. During the Kamakura and Muromachi periods, 1185 to 1573, as tea gardens developed under Zen influence, more rustic and subtle gate forms emerged. The development of roji, tea garden paths, introduced gates that marked transitions between outer and inner garden areas, physical expressions of the spiritual journey of the tea ceremony participant. And in the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, stroll gardens incorporated numerous gates as narrative devices marking transitions between themed areas representing different famous landscapes or poetic references. At Ritsurin Garden, a sequence of gates guides visitors through carefully orchestrated views and experiences. Japanese garden gates take several distinctive forms, each with specific meanings and applications, such as structural gates, mengao-e, monkamae. These substantial architectural elements include roof structures and often define major entrances. They range from elaborate temple-style gates to simpler wooden structures with distinctive roof forms. At Okochi Sanso Villa in Kyoto, the main entrance gate marks a decisive threshold between the busy tourist district outside and the serene garden world within, a dramatic transition reinforced by the gate's solid presence. Next up are bamboo gates, yuingen-men, kekineomon. These lightweight, rustic gates, constructed from bamboo and natural materials, create subtle thresholds that blend with garden plantings. Often found in tea gardens, they mark transitions without imposing heavy architectural elements. The famous bamboo gate at Kotoin Temple in Kyoto exemplifies refined rusticity, with its carefully bound bamboo structure creating an elegant yet unpretentious entrance to the inner tea garden. Number 3. Symbolic gates, Juwu-men, Kyomumon. Some gates are reduced to minimal suggestions, perhaps just 2 posts with a simple crossbeam, or even an opening in a hedge or fence. These minimal expressions rely on implication rather than explicit structure. At Shiseindo Temple in Kyoto, a simple opening in a bamboo fence marks the transition to the inner garden, its effectiveness coming from context and positioning rather than elaborate construction. Several specialized gate forms serve particular purposes in Japanese gardens, such as the nakamon, jongmen, inner gates marking transitions within the garden, or kuromon, heimen, black painted gates often used at temple entrances, and higurashimon, ri-mu-rashimen, sunset gates, positioned to frame specific light conditions. And finally, Nijiriguchi, Linko, the distinctive crawl-through entrances to tea houses. Gate placement in Japanese gardens follows several key principles. Gates mark meaningful transitions between different garden areas or experiences, and they control and frame views, revealing or concealing what lies beyond. They move slow, creating pauses in the garden journey, as they prepare visitors mentally for what follows. This concept of preparatory space is exemplified by the famous path to Kinkakuji, Golden Pavilion in Kyoto, where a sequence of gates gradually reveals the iconic structure and its reflection, building anticipation through controlled revelation. Gates play a crucial role in the Japanese garden principle of miegakure, jian-egakure, or hide and reveal, the technique of partially concealing views to create mystery and discovery. A gate never reveals everything that lies beyond, but offers partial glimpses that invite further exploration. At Shugaku Inn, Imperial Villa in Kyoto, gates are positioned so that each new garden area is suggested but not fully disclosed until the visitor passes through the threshold, creating a sequence of discoveries rather than a single comprehensive view. In modern garden design, gate concepts can be adapted to contemporary settings while maintaining their essential functions. Simple post structures can define thresholds without requiring elaborate construction. Material choices can reference tradition while integrating with modern architecture. Strategic openings in walls, hedges, or fences can function as gates without literal gate structures. Lighting can enhance the threshold experience, especially for evening garden use. Even in small gardens, thoughtfully placed gates can create the impression of greater depth and complexity by dividing space into distinct experiences. And for our final architectural element, we will observe the pavilions, used for framing nature's beauty. Pavilions in Japanese gardens, known variously as azumaya, East House, Tia, or Chin, serve as privileged viewing positions from which to appreciate the surrounding landscape. Unlike Western garden pavilions often designed primarily for social gatherings, Japanese pavilions function as devices for focused appreciation of nature, frames that enhance our perception of beauty through careful positioning and design. The term pavilion encompasses structures ranging from elaborate multi-story buildings to the simplest roofed platforms, all sharing the common purpose of creating ideal vantage points for experiencing the garden. Pavilion design in Japanese gardens evolved through distinct historical phases. During the Heian period, 794 to 1185, aristocratic gardens featured elegant Chinese-inspired pavilions extending over ponds, where courtiers would compose poetry inspired by reflections and views. These buildings, known as Chindian, were integral parts of aristocratic residences rather than standalone structures. The Kamakura and Muromachi periods, 1185 to 1573, saw the development of more specialized viewing pavilions influenced by Zen Buddhism's emphasis on contemplation of nature. The famous Golden Pavilion, Kinkakuji, and Silver Pavilion, Ginkakuji, in Kyoto, represent the pinnacle of this tradition, though their elaborateness is exceptional rather than typical. Edo period, 1603 to 1868. Stroll gardens incorporated multiple pavilions positioned to capture specific views or seasonal phenomena. At Katsura Imperial Villa, a sequence of pavilions offers different perspectives on the garden, each carefully calibrated to highlight particular features or seasonal effects. Japanese garden pavilions take several distinctive forms, each serving specific purposes. Multi-purpose pavilions, 4A, azumaya. These structures typically feature open sides with a simple roof supported by posts, creating shelter while maintaining connection with surroundings. Azumaya provide places for rest, contemplation, poetry composition, or tea preparation. At Ritsuren Garden in Takamatsu, the Kikugetsu-tei Pavilion extends over the water, creating dramatic reflections while offering multiple viewing angles of the surrounding garden, exemplifying how these structures serve both aesthetic and practical functions. Some pavilions are designed specifically for appreciating particular natural phenomena, such as the Tsukimi-dai, Yuejian-tai, moon viewing platforms positioned to capture moon reflections in water, or Yukimi-dai, Shuejian-tai, snow viewing platforms placed to appreciate snow accumulation on garden elements, and also Hanami-tei, Huajian-ting, flower viewing pavilions positioned near seasonal blooming trees. At Katsura Imperial Villa, the Shokin-tei Pavilion includes a special veranda positioned precisely to view the moon's reflection in the garden pond, an example of architecture designed around specific temporal events. Some pavilions reference boat forms, creating the sensation of floating on water. The famous Ukimido Pavilion at Nara's Sagike Pond appears to float above the water's surface, creating dramatic reflections while referencing China's West Lake pavilions. While distinct from formal tea houses, many gardens include pavilions for preparing or enjoying tea in less ceremonial settings. These structures, often called azumaya-dai, provide shelter while maintaining connections with garden views. At Kenroku-en Garden in Kanazawa, the Yugao-tei Tea Pavilion offers space for informal tea enjoyment while framing views of the garden's famous Kasumigaike Pond. Japanese garden pavilions share several distinctive design features. 1. Harmonic proportions, based on the traditional module of the tatami mat, approximately 91 by 100, so 82 centimeters, creating a human-scaled space. 2. Natural materials. They are predominantly wood construction with minimal finishing, allowing natural grain and aging to create character. 3. The roof. Emphasis, often featuring visually dominant roof structures that provide both practical shelter and aesthetic emphasis. 4. Open design. Minimal walls or completely open sides that blur boundaries between interior and exterior space. And 5. An elevated position, typically raised above ground level to provide both practical protection and enhanced views. The positioning of pavilions in Japanese gardens follows several key principles. 1. Pavilions create destinations within the garden journey. 2. Their placement captures specific views, seasonal phenomena, or borrowed scenery. 3. They provide shelter that encourages lingering and deeper appreciation. 4. Their reflections in water often double their visual impact. And 5. Their positioning often marks important transitions or focal points in the garden. At Karaku-en Garden in Okayama, the Enyote Pavilion occupies an elevated position that commands views of the entire garden while nestling harmoniously into the landscape, exemplifying how pavilions can both stand apart from and belong to their surroundings. In modern garden design, pavilion concepts can be adapted to contemporary settings. Simple architectural forms can reference tradition without literal reproduction. Sustainable materials can honor the traditional emphasis on natural elements. Strategic positioning remains essential, regardless of architectural style. Scale appropriate to the overall garden preserves the balance between nature and architecture. Even in small gardens, a simple seating area with minimal overhead structure can function as a pavilion, creating a designated place for appreciating garden views. As we've explored the tea houses, bridges, gates, and pavilions of Japanese gardens, a consistent philosophy emerges. These structures exist not to dominate nature, but to enhance our experience of it. This represents a fundamental difference from many Western garden traditions, where architecture often serves as the primary focus with nature as its frame. In Japanese garden design, architectural elements succeed when they create dialogue with nature structures, respond to and highlight natural features, rather than competing with them. At Katsura Imperial Villa, each pavilion is positioned to frame specific garden views and seasonal phenomena, embody philosophical principles. Architecture physically expresses concepts like impermanence, refinement through simplicity, and the beauty of natural materials. The tea house, with its deliberate humility, makes these principles tangible. Guide experience. Gates, bridges, and paths control how we move through and perceive the garden, creating a sequence of revelations rather than a single comprehensive view. This embodies the Japanese concept of miegakures, or hide and reveal. Connect to cultural context. Garden structures link visitors to broader Japanese cultural traditions, from tea ceremony to poetry composition to contemplative practice. This cultural resonance adds depth to the garden experience. When incorporating architectural elements into your own Japanese-inspired garden, remember that authentic design comes not from exact replication, but from understanding these underlying principles. Even the simplest structure, a bamboo fence, a stepping stone path, a modest bench under a maple tree, can embody these principles when thoughtfully designed and placed. The true art lies in creating what appears to be effortless harmony, where architecture and nature become partners in creating spaces that speak to both the eye and the spirit. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of architectural elements in Japanese gardens. I hope you've gained not just knowledge, but inspiration for how thoughtfully designed structures can transform outdoor spaces into profound experiences. If you enjoyed this journey through Japanese garden architecture, please subscribe to Sakura and Stone for more insights into Japanese gardens, aesthetics, and philosophies. Leave a comment sharing which architectural element resonates most with you, or questions about incorporating these elements into your own garden spaces. I read every comment and love connecting with fellow garden enthusiasts. Until next time, may you find moments of tranquility and beauty in gardens both grand and humble. Thank you for watching our videos. Matane!